responsible for laundering most of the $250 billion a year?
New York, California.
And Texas. Which 4 states make up 80% of all presidential campaign donations? Who governs Texas and Florida? Why does Hillary want New York? Who was the largest contributor to Bill Clinton in 1996? Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs. You know that it's not legal to move drug money through banks because they have to report it. You know it's perfectly legal to move drug money through the stock market? You just have to wash it one time. We will come to that in just a second. Okay? All right, now that I'm starting to get your attention. Everybody remember the Gary Webb stories of 1996 about crack cocaine in South Central Los Angeles? Yeah. That was the stuff that prompted the hearings that we had here. Okay? John Deutsch sat there at Locke High School and he said, "We will bring the people to justice." They have not been brought to justice. The official position of the Central Intelligence Agency's Inspector General was, well, you know, we have some problems. Although the House Intelligence Committee said there's no evidence, the CIA on October the 8th of 1998, and that's a very significant date that we'll get to in a moment, published Volume 2 of the CIA's Inspector General findings. Volume 2 is 440 pages. These are extracts and commentary that I publish from those. It's like all the really juicy parts out of a, love novel, okay? I just pulled the dirty parts out of the CIA report. About 60 pages. I want to read you a couple of quotes. These are the CIA's own words. Now, paragraphs 490 and 91, I'll paraphrase just in the interest of time. There was a guy named Moises Nunez during the Contra War who owned a company called Frigoríficos de Punta Arenas, okay, which is like a frozen shrimp company out of Costa Rica. He was making weekly shipments. Moises Nunez had a contract, a humanitarian aid contract of about $120,000 a year to supply aid to the Contra rebels. Okay, he made weekly trips, and on one of these weekly trips, he was caught with 220 kilos of cocaine. That is not for personal use, okay? 220 kilos of cocaine. And the CIA's Inspector General report states that Nunez refused to elaborate on the nature of these actions, but indicated it was difficult to answer questions relating to his involvement in narcotics trafficking because of the specific tasks he had performed at the direction of the NSC. He says, I can't tell you because I'm working for Oliver North. National Security Council is one level above the CIA. It's the president's oversight body. In paragraph 491, headquarters cabled in April 1987 that a decision had been made to debrief Nunez regarding the revelations he had made. That's CIA headquarters. Then it says, the next day, however, a headquarters cable stated that headquarters had decided against debriefing Nunez. The cable offered no explanation for the decision. Don't ask him any more questions. In another paragraph of the CIA report, and here it states that a company called Setco, owned by one of the largest drug traffickers in history, Juan Ramon Mara Ballesteros, also receiving State Department subsidies arranged by Elliott Abrams, Vice President George Bush, Oliver North, which was moving 4 tons of cocaine a month, was using bank accounts opened by Oliver North. It's right here in black and white. Let me show you the most amazing thing that came out of this report. I think I just blew the bulb. I did. I just blew the bulb. Okay, hold it. No. One of the things that came out of that, this is a memorandum. In the early days of the Reagan administration, the Reagan Attorney General, William French Smith, and the CIA Director, William Casey, engaged in a series of negotiations. And you remember a few minutes ago I was talking to you about the case officer being the highest rung on the food chain, and then they have career agents and all that stuff down the line? Title 18 U.S. Code requires that any time a U.S. government employee violates the law, that his department is required to report it. In other words, if I'm the FBI director and I'm aware that somebody in U.S. Customs is dealing drugs, I have to turn them in. It makes perfect sense. It's the way you'd want your government to operate, right? Well, in a series of negotiations, beginning in 1981 and concluding on February 11th, 1982, William French Smith and Bill Casey did two things. First of all, they took all those people at CIA who were not case officers, the career agents, the contract agents, the foreign agents, the employees of the CIA proprietaries, and said, under the purposes of our new MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, these people are not employees of CIA. Then, on February 11th, I'm going to read you a sentence. This is a letter to the Honorable William Casey, Director of the Central Intelligence Agency, signed by William French Smith, Attorney General. And right at the bottom it says, in light of these provisions and in view of the fine cooperation the Drug Enforcement Administration has received from CIA, no formal requirement regarding the reporting of narcotics violations has been included in these procedures. By the stroke of a pen, the CIA and Department of Justice have conspired to enter into an agreement where the CIA doesn't have to report it when its people are dealing drugs. Proof of a conspiracy. Now, U.S. cocaine consumption went from roughly, oh, beautiful. He's pretty good, huh? There it is, okay. Here's just a little out of focus. No. Okay, you can read it right here. You can see U.S. Attorney General, February 11th, William Casey, and right down here, just so you can see it, and it's right there. I have it, and it's in the back of the extracts that I have over there for sale. In light of these provisions and in view of the fine cooperation DEA has received from CIA, no formal requirement regarding the reporting of narcotics violations has been included in these procedures. Proof of a conspiracy, right there in black and white. Okay. Now, yet your Congress, Julian Dixon, wrote that there was no evidence that CIA had any involvement with the drug trade. He had more information than I have just shown you, including all of the documents in this that are much too long to go into right now. Now I want to get your attention. How many people are native from Southern California, from LA area? Great. This is a map prepared by former Assistant Secretary of Housing, Catherine Austin Fitz. Who wrote for From the Wilderness, and she contributes every now and again from time to time. She's also a former managing director of the Wall Street investment bank Dillon Reed, a graduate of the Wharton School of Business with an MBA in business. She was consulting for HUD in 1996, and she started using HUD data to prepare maps of how the money worked. Now, for those of you who live here, if I say this is the Santa Monica Freeway, and I say this is the Harbor Freeway, you would agree with me that that is South Central Los Angeles, would you not? We're right now right about here, okay? Every one of those dots represents a foreclosure on a single-family home in South Central Los Angeles between 1982 and 1990 that remained unsold as of 1994. There were literally tens of thousands of single-family home foreclosures. Now, I don't know if any of you ever bought anything on terms, okay? But you know that if you go to buy a house, let's say you buy a house for $100,000, you have to take out a loan and you have interest to pay, and you may put $10,000, $15,000 down to qualify for the loan, which means you owe $80,000 or $90,000, right? Makes sense. And everybody banks on when you buy a home that the home is going to go up in value, right? When crack cocaine hit South Central Los Angeles, it was called rock when it first got here. Okay, what happened? South Central turned into a battleground. All around here, working south, working all around in this area right here, Freeway Ricky Ross, who was protected by the CIA. He didn't know it. I know him. I've spoken to his mother and his brother. Sold right around the Harbor Freeway. The crack houses sprang up around here. Now, if you have a house that's on a block where there's drive-by shootings, there's strawberries turning tricks on the corner, there's a couple of businesses close by that employ 20 or 30 people, and the people who work there are getting mugged every day. Daryl Gates is driving his battering ram into the house next door, okay? Is the value of your house going to go up or is it going to go down? Duh, okay? Well, what happened was the value of these houses tanked, but not only that, people who lived there had children. That's why you buy a house, for your kids. And their children are getting shot. Their children are getting strung out on crack. It's not safe to live there. And what do they want to do? They want to sell their house and move. But the house that they owe $90,000 on, the appraiser comes out and looks at the drive-by shootings, the rock houses, the strawberries, the fact that the industry is moving out, everything looks trash, and says your house is only worth $40,000. So how do you sell it? You can't. These people, to save their families, walked away. And I will tell you that the HUD data showed, and we've published this in From the Wilderness, and it's on my website at copvcia.com, that not too long after the crack cocaine epidemic subsided, a bunch of people who were not African American natives of Los Angeles came along and bought these houses for 10 and 20 cents on the dollar. Now, if this were happening in Kosovo, we'd call it ethnic cleansing. When it happens in America, we call it kill the Indians and take the land. But the economic system, which now puts 2 million people in prison and makes money off of that, has the perfect economic model. Let's use the black people's money that we get out of them for buying crack cocaine to steal their own houses from them. That's exactly how this is going to work, and I'm going to show you that in a minute in Colombia. Okay? I got your attention. Now, if somebody's dealing drugs, you just can't walk around with a suitcase full of $20 bills and walk into a bank. Everybody, or you should know, that there's a thing called a CTR, which stands for Currency Transaction Report, so that if you or I walk into a bank with $10,001, the bank has to fill out a form which goes to the U.S. Department of Treasury, which then reports us as possible money laundering suspects. Certain businesses are exempt under statute from reporting excessive currency transactions. A bank, duh. A department or agency of the U.S. government or any state or political subdivision thereof, an entity established under the laws of any state, City of Los Angeles, County of Los Angeles, a listed entity other than a bank whose common stock or analogous equity interests are listed on the New York Stock Exchange or ASE or are designated as a NASDAQ national market security. If you've got a ticker symbol on Wall Street, you're exempt from all money laundering reporting. It's right there, black and white. A subsidiary other than a bank of a listed entity that is organized under the U.S. or state law at 51% of whose common stock is owned by the listed entity. A financial institution that is a listed entity that qualifies for an exemption to the extent of its domestic operations. Now, let's go back to this area right here. You ever look around the neighborhood and see 25 fast food places and wonder why there's never anybody in them? Okay? Fast food places, whether it's Taco Bell or Kentucky Fried Chicken, are exempt from money laundering statutes. Whether you're in Jackson Heights in New York City, where it's Dominican bodegas, where there are 15 on a block that never sell anything, or you're in South Central Los Angeles, where there's 200 liquor stores and 9,000 fast food places all on the same block that nobody ever goes to, that's a great way to launder money. It's a perfect cover. Okay, but it's a much bigger deal when you get to Wall Street. Okay, now let's go to Wall Street. The CIA was created by the National Security Act of 1947. It was written by Democratic powerhouse, and I tell you emphatically that both parties are guilty. If you think the Democrats or Republicans are any better than one way or another, you're wrong. If you don't play with drug money in this country and this economy, you can't play at all. Okay, and we're going to cover that. I just want to put that idea in your mind because Clark Clifford was an advisor to Harry Truman. He was a Democratic powerhouse, about as powerful as Warren Christopher is now. The National Security Act 1947 was written by Clark Clifford. That created CIA. Does anybody know what Clark Clifford's profession was, aside from being an advisor to Harry Truman? Wall Street lawyer and banker. The design for the National Security Act was given to Clark Clifford by Allen Dulles. You should all know him from the John Kennedy years. He was a director of Central Intelligence, or DCI. And John Foster Dulles, who was Secretary of State to Dwight Eisenhower. Okay, that was 47, and they served from 53 to 63. John Kennedy fired Allen Dulles after Bay of Pigs. Anybody know what their profession was?
Corporate lawyers.
Excellent. What firm, do you know?
United Fruit.
One of their clients was United Fruit, but their firm was Sullivan and Cromwell, the third largest law firm on Wall Street. (1981 to 86), William Casey was Ronald Reagan's director of Central. 87. Bill Casey was Ronald Reagan's director of Central Intelligence. What did he do for Richard Nixon when Nixon was president from 68 to 74? Chairman, Securities and Exchange Commission, Wall Street. David Daugherty, the CIA general counsel, actually he was the CIA general, he was CIA general counsel from about 1989 to 1995. What is he doing today? Executive Vice President for Enforcement, New York Stock Exchange. Is there a connection between CIA and Wall Street? Yeah, I think so. How many people here know, anybody here own stock? It's okay, it's not a crime, it's good. Who can define for me what a price to earnings ratio is? Okay, price to earnings, P to E. They carry it in every newspaper in the country. Market capitalization divided by net profits. Market capitalization is equal to total shares by the share price. So let's say that you own a company that has 100,000 shares in existence, and those shares are trading for $30 a piece. How much? What's your market capitalization? 3 million, right? All right. Let's say your net profit on an annual basis is $100,000. If I did this right, you reduce this, should be 30 to 1. Did I do it right? I think. A lot of math majors. Okay. Okay. 30 to 1. For every dollar of net profit that you add here, the total value of the stock in circulation goes up $30. Make sense? Okay, let's say that you own an orange juice company right here in Los Angeles. Okay, what's your name? Laura? Laura's orange juice is fabulous orange juice. She has $1 million net profit a year. Okay? Now, you're not a major company. You're not a GE, you're not a Pepsi, you don't have a Pop, you don't even trade, but you just have $1 million net profit a year. But let's say that you're Pepsi-Cola, okay, which owns Tropicana orange juice, all right? And you're looking at her company that makes $1 million net profit a year, and her orange juice is 10 times better than Tropicana, okay? That doesn't make any difference. You don't care about quality, you're caring about stock value. How much money are you going to be willing to pay her for her orange juice company? What do you think? $29 million? If you have a pop of 30 to 1, if you have a price to earnings of 30 to 1, would you pay $29 million for her company if you knew that the next day that you did that, your net profit in the value of your stock was going to be an additional $1 million? And it's all paper. Would you do that? They do it all the time. Okay? That's the pop, okay? That's part of what's driving the total insanity behind not only the war on drugs, but behind the wars in Kosovo, the coming war in Colombia, and a lot of things that you don't understand. And you're going to understand them when you walk out of here today. It's going to be hopefully that clear. All right? This is a series of stories from Le Monde, which is one of my favorite publications, which is out of Paris. It's one of the premier political magazines in the world, and I'm grateful to say that my newsletter and website's been endorsed by Le Monde Diplomatique, Manière de Voir. They did a two-part series of stories in April of this year called Crime, the World's Biggest Free Enterprise, and it talks about the proceeds of criminal activity being $1 trillion a year. $1 trillion a year in criminal activity. Now remember, if money is like water, and you have a particular kind of water that flows faster, it's unfettered by banking laws, it's untaxed, it's unregulated, nobody knows where it is. And the key advantage in any business situation is getting the money or the water to any particular issue fastest. The crime money always gives you an unfair advantage. Those with the lowest cost of capital win. How many people have ever financed a car? Okay. Real quick. Let me just give you these numbers first, and then I'll come back to that exercise. Le Monde in Paris did an analysis, and they said this about the money from the drug trade. Even owing for overheads, production and suppliers, intermediaries and corruptions, investment expenditure, management costs, losses from seizures and crackdowns amounting to roughly 50% of turnover, that still leaves annual profits of $500 billion. That's the whole crime issue. Over 10 years, that makes $5,000 billion, more than 3 times the foreign currency reserves of all the central banks, 1/4 of the capitalization of the world's top 5 stock markets, and 10 times that of Paris. In this report, the CIA says, well, we only look at drug money when it's strategic enough to influence national economies and the balance of power in the world. That's why they control it. Okay, now, are we over at sharply at 2, David, or should I?
Go ahead.
Okay. Okay. All right, given that frame of mind, if you've ever financed a car, let's say you want to go in to buy a car, okay, and you walk into the Ford dealer, and they run your credit check, okay? And let's say your credit happens to be not so good, okay? And they say, well, you walk in with an idea of I can only afford payments of $400 a month, okay? And she walks in and they run her credit and they say, well, you know, I can get you financed, but I can only get you financed at maybe about 14%, 15%, a pretty high rate. Instead of this Explorer that you were looking at, I can put you into this Focus, okay? On the other hand, if Joe walks in and Joe's got sterling A1 credit, hey man, Joe, I can get you financed at 3% for $400 a month. Forget the Explorer, let's do the Lincoln Navigator. Same payments. Joe says, great. It all has to do with the cost of capital. Now, if you at Pepsi are buying her company, sometimes when you get into these huge mega mergers like AOL Time Warner, you have to do what's called an LBO, a leveraged buyout. And you know what that means in plain English? Is that you have to borrow the money to buy her company because you're going to spend $200 billion. Let's say it's RJR Nabisco, okay? All right? Now, legally the way you borrow money is you go to banks like Bankers Trust, Deutsche Bank, Morgan Stanley, and you would borrow money at, say, 10%. It is perfectly legal under the laws of the United States by design, as designed by these bankers and lawyers, to go to the Cayman Islands and borrow drug money at 5%. You only have to launder it one time, put it right into Wall Street. Period. Where are you going to borrow your money? If you're in a bidding war, let's say you're Pepsi-Cola and you're Coca-Cola and you're Philip Morris, and you all want to buy her company, and you're in this bidding war, and they're going to Morgan Stanley and Bankers Trust, you go to the Cayman Islands, who's going to win the bidding war? The guy that can afford to buy the Navigator because he's paying a lower interest rate, or the person who has to pay a higher interest rate and buy the Focus? Drug money is the advantage that's given to the ruling elites on Wall Street, and they protect it. We're going to prove it to you, okay? It's not difficult to understand once you see how it all works. Read it for yourself. Oh, I got to put the screen back down. What that story is going to tell you is that in June of 1999, Richard Grasso, the chairman of the New York Stock Exchange, traveled to Colombia. Yuck. I don't know why that's so hard to read. Richard Grasso, and it was an unusual pitch by the chairman of the New York Stock Exchange delivered in Colombia's steaming southern savannah to a senior commander of the hemisphere's oldest and largest leftist insurgency. Make peace and expect great economic benefits from global investors. We are very aggressive in trying to pursue international markets and opportunities. Richard Grasso, the chairman of the New York Stock Exchange, flew first class from New York to Bogota, hopped in an armor-plated limousine, drove up into the southern half of the country where the FARC guerrillas now control and tax most of the coca trade. Actually, not most of it, but about half, but they control half the countryside. And he asked them to invest their drug profits in Wall Street. Black and white, right there. He didn't say stop dealing drugs, it's bad for American youth. He said, keep dealing drugs, send your money to Wall Street. And you know what FARC said to Richard Grasso? Screw you. We think we should keep our money in Colombia for the benefit of the Colombian people. FARC is up to its eyeballs in the cocaine trade. Everybody in Colombia is up to its eyeballs in the cocaine trade. The right-wing paramilitaries are up to their eyeballs in the cocaine trade, and so is the government and the military. Isn't it interesting that in a country torn by civil war, Colombia has increased its drug production by 10 to 15% every year for the last 8 years? Can you picture 3 guys in a knockdown, drag-out fight, yet they're more productive in the worst workplace than ever? Doesn't make sense, does it? Okay. The money laundering through U.S. banks is so transparent to the rest of the world that the Caribbean leaders complained to Janet Rito at a money laundering meeting in June of this year. And you know what they complained? You're making it so hard on us because you're taking all the drug money laundering to Wall Street banks in New York. We can't make any money. There it is right there. We're creating economic hardships because we're sucking all the drug money into the stock market and Wall Street banks. Caribbean leaders plan to bombard U.S. Attorney General Janet Reno with their grievances Monday, denouncing U.S. efforts to fight money launderings as a David versus Goliath battle to destroy their burgeoning offshore industry. America is more hooked on drug money than it is on drugs. Now, not too long ago, as reported by Lowell Bergman on PBS, June 2000, Janet Reno and Deputy Treasury Secretary Stuart Eizenstat had a meeting, and they called in Hewlett-Packard, Ford, Sony, General Motors, Whirlpool, General Electric, Philip Morris, and Bell Helicopter. Okay? Now, let me ask you a question. If you know what you know about the POP, okay, and you're General Motors, and I'm Pablo Ruppert in Colombia, I'm the drug lord of Colombia, and I call up the Southern Hemisphere Vice President of General Motors and say, I'd like to buy 100 armor-plated Suburbans with cash. Do you care? What are you going to say? You going to sell me the Suburbans for cash? Yeah, absolutely. Hewlett-Packard sells computers, Ford sells trucks, Sony sells DVDs and VCR, General Motors, Whirlpool. Philip Morris, by the way, is currently being sued by 24-some departments of Colombia, the effective Colombian states, for money laundering. You know what they're doing? They're smuggling Marlboros into Colombia. And they're selling the Marlboros for drug cash that they're taking directly back to Wall Street to boost their stock values. They're doing it off the book to boost their profits. And they're being sued by Colombia. That I got off Center for Public Integrity. Okay? Bell Helicopter, they're selling helicopters. Now, if I'm Pablo Ruppert, and I call up General Electric, the most respected corporation in America, okay, right there, and I say, I've got $100 million, I'd like to buy $1 billion worth of refrigerators, DVDs, VCRs, TVs, telephones, appliances, so that I can open Pablo's Appliances all throughout South America, which makes my drug money legal. GE says yes. If GE turns a $100 million net profit on their sale, how much, with a price to earnings of 30 to 1, does GE stock go up? How much? $3 billion. How do all the executives on Wall Street get paid? Stock options. Okay? On August the 30th, President William Jefferson Clinton, who gave us Plan Colombia, and we've already taken combat casualties there, it is the next Vietnam, and I will spend time talking about that, went to Cartagena, Colombia on August 30th to kick off the $1.3 billion aid package. If Colombia won't invest its money in Wall Street, we'll take it, and as part of that plan, we will require the Colombian government to spray Fusarium oxysporum, or Agent Green, it's a fungus, on the lands occupied by the guerrillas, which will not only destroy the coca, it will destroy the food crops. It's a fungus that is capable of mutating and attacking people. And the intent is not to eradicate cocaine production, it's to drive the cocaine production from the lands controlled by the FARC guerrillas onto the lands controlled by the paramilitaries who have said, we love Wall Street, we'll invest our profits. Okay? With President Clinton on August 30th, James Kimsey, the president of America Online. Oliver North's on the board, by the way. Dwayne Ackerman, president of Bell South. Paul Sharon, president of Liz Claiborne. Why does Liz Claiborne have an interest in Southern Colombia? Rare flowers for perfumes and cosmetics, okay? Martha Behar, president of Nortel. Ted McNamara, president, Council of the Americas. It's like a box within a box. You open up Council of the Americas, which is a creation of the Trilateral Commission and the Council on Foreign Relations of the Rockefellers. And I understand David has, I don't know if you had him read Thy Will Be Done. It's a book by Gerard Colby on the Rockefellers in South America. That's a fabulous book. You open up the box of Council of the Americas, and this is a full membership list, but let me just read you a few of the companies that are supporting the next war, the next Vietnam War. American Airlines, American Express, American International, Amway, Anheuser-Busch, Archer Daniels Midland, AT&T, the Bank of New York, Bank of America, Bell South, Bristol-Myers, Champion Sparkplug, Chevron, Chiquita Brands, Citibank, Coca-Cola, Colgate-Palmolive, Compaq Computer, Conoco, Continental Airlines, Coors, Credit Suisse, Daimler Chrysler, Discovery, Disney, Donaldson Lufkin Genret, Dow Jones, Eastman Kodak, Federal Express, General Electric, General Motors, Gibson Dunn & Crutcher, Goldman Sachs, Hill & Knowlton, IBM, Kissinger McLarty & Associates, one of my favorites, J.P. Morgan, KPMG, Manat Phelps & Phillips, Merrill Lynch, Morgan Stanley, Motorola, a law firm called Sullivan & Cromwell, Scudder Kemper, Raytheon, Philip Morris, Pepsi-Cola, Pfizer, Siemens, Sprint, TRW, Texaco, Turner Broadcasting, Unical, and Union Pacific. By the way, does everybody here know that CNN, for all of its live satellite feeds, uses military satellites? Think about that. This is from just about a week ago. Tuesday, November 21st, a little bit longer. Bogota, White House drug czar Barry McCaffrey on Monday predicted heavy fighting in an approaching U.S.-backed anti-drug offensive and warned that there would be repercussions for all of Colombia's neighbors. The instant that we have a new president in this country, no matter who it is, several things are going to happen. First of all, the primary net result of the current election crisis is a totally weakened, emasculated, if you will, national government, especially the executive branch. A divided Senate, a president with no mandate, a country really upset. That means that every corporation, as part of the globalization move, will be able to operate virtually unpoliced because there will not be the political will or the financial governmental will to support moves to police or control corporations behind globalization. The corporations are the ones pushing for the war. The president won't have the ability to stop anything. He won't have the ability to stop the military. A looting of unprecedented scale will take place of the American government. $59 billion is already missing from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. I'm doing a story on that for the next issue of From the Wilderness. Okay? So several things are certain. The one way that this country will be united under our new president, whoever it is that we're going to have a war. Americans tend to get intoxicated by wars. We think it's a great thing that when our stock market is down or when we're having a bad time to go and kill a few 100,000 people of some color other than white, because it unites us. But the reasons and the rationale in Colombia are manifold. It's like a swarm. It's like a floating crap game. And it is not going to be a Desert Storm. It is not going to be a Panama. It is not going to be a Grenada. It is going to be a Vietnam. And there are many, many reasons why. We have Fusarium oxysporum is a defoliant like Agent Orange was in Vietnam. Already for the nations all around Colombia, Ecuador has converted to the US dollar. Bolivia has expressed reservations. President Alberto Fujimori in Peru, and I'm going to be writing about this too, recently came out in opposition to Plan Colombia, and he was replaced by a coup. Now, he was a CIA creation, but so was Manuel Noriega, and one of Manuel Noriega's faults before he was overthrown by George Bush was that he was withdrawing his support for the Contra War and coming out in support of the Contadora peace process. Fujimori was turning nationalistic. Okay? Every country around Colombia will be involved, and US troops will have to go. Why? Several reasons, but the most important reason, no matter what they tell you, is that the technology is so advanced. The FARC guerrillas have used a SAM-16, this is according to Salon magazine, a radar-controlled missile, to shoot down Army spy planes. And the technology used to shoot down radar-guided anti-aircraft missiles is stuff that the US does not give to other countries. We are committed. We already have 300 plus US Army Special Forces troops on the ground, plus a number of companies like MPRI, which is out of Washington, D.C., DynCorp, all of which are, they call them outsourcing companies, are using sheep-dipped military and CIA personnel posing as civilians who are actually going on combat missions. They're probably among the 50 companies down there in Colombia right now, several thousand Americans in combat advisory roles. It's a PR stunt to make it look like it's not Vietnam. But 24 Black Hawk US helicopters are going down there in January. The war kicks off in January. And the economy is extremely precarious. I am firmly convinced, and I've been writing about this extensively in From the Wilderness, and I have some back issues. Andrea, we have some of these? You might want to get these. If you don't want to subscribe, these are like $4, and we'll give you 2 for the price of 1. We'll give you another month. About how precarious the current economic situation is and why it's being sustained in a kind of search and destroy economy. And the essence of what I write about is backed up by other economic researchers, because I'm not an economist by training, is that in 1997, the Asian market tanked. You may remember that, and there was great panic in the United States and great fear that the US market was going to tank in 97 and 98. Okay, the way that we forestalled that in 1999 was that we blew up Kosovo. And we destroyed every oil refinery within a 500-mile radius of the Kosovo on the Danube. We destroyed every bridge. We destroyed every hydroelectric generating station. We destroyed the whole infrastructure of an entire region. There are vast quantities of oil in Kosovo, too. The Kosovo Liberation Army was responsible for 70% of the heroin entering Western Europe. Who got the contracts to rebuild the refineries, the bridges, and the hydroelectric? Well, why do you think all of these companies are so interested in going to Colombia? Because when we blow everything up, they're going to get to rebuild it. Okay? These companies right in here, KMR Power, Global Crossing, AES, these are all companies that build hydroelectric generating stations. Okay? We're going to maquiladorize Colombia, so to speak. We're going to dislocate hundreds of thousands of people, drive them to the cities, and they'll be forced to work for all of these corporations for slave wages. We did that in Colombia, in Kosovo as well, and the proceeds were shared by the United States, Great Britain, and Germany. We saved the U.S. economy in '99 by blowing up Kosovo, and now, according to several economists, unless we blow up Colombia and have this major protracted war, the current Wall Street economy is going to collapse. Now, there's a myth that's attached to all of this, okay? And I can see it in your eyes as I look at you. I can see, like, well, oh my God, and now if we shut off the drug trade, I have to choose between shutting off the drug trade and my 401k plan not being worth as much. Okay, Catherine Austin Fitts, a former assistant secretary, recently gave a lecture similar to this before about 100 millionaires at a group in Pennsylvania. And at the end of her lecture, she said, okay, if this was a button that you could push that would stop the drug trade instantly, now that you know why the drug trade is what it is, how many people would come down and push it? And nobody came. One guy, he came down and said, I'll push it. The other 99 rich folk wouldn't come down and push the button. No matter how many people died in this country, no matter the fact that we put 1 million people in jail for nonviolent drug offenses, and that also feeds the stock market. Wackenhut and Correction Corporation of America are two private companies that run prisons, and they trade their stock on Wall Street based upon the number of people in jail. We are a search and destroy economy. But there is an alternative, and this is what they don't want you to know. This is why they want to keep you afraid and somehow criminally culpable, like guilty knowledge, and I don't want to stand up and talk about this. There are other ways of creating wealth that would create infinitely more wealth. And if you go back, it lies at the extreme heart of this and what the FARC are doing in Colombia, but it also lies at the root of this right here in South Central. Okay? If you keep the money in the neighborhood where it belongs, you can create neighborhood-based stock corporations that generate more wealth because you know how the money works in your neighborhood better than anybody else does. It's all FARC wants to do with the drug money they tax in Colombia. Those who win in a rigged game get stupid. Think about that. The people that are running this game in Wall Street have been doing this for a long time. They have been doing this in a rigged situation, whether they're rigging the laws or the investigations or anything else, and it's come to almost the inevitable collapse of a pyramid scheme. The ways to create alternative wealth, like the information age creates enormous wealth, okay, almost out of nothing, okay? The ways to create wealth are not by sucking the money out of communities, but by giving control of the money back to the communities, because the people best, you are performers, you have to work for your living, okay, and you know best how to use it. That's the secret they don't want you to know. Okay, I realize that this is a pretty heavy subject, and I realize that all eyes are focused on Washington, but they should really be focused now right here. Okay, we have stated in hearings, and I'll shut up with this and be happy to take your questions, that we're going to stage for the invasion of Colombia from Puerto Rico. Congressional testimony, September of last year, General Charles Wilhelm. Venezuela is denying U.S. overflight. They're our largest or second largest oil supplier. We've just had a coup in Peru. We're opening air bases in northern Peru now under the new government. We've got an air base in Ecuador. We're talking about military intervention in Peru. I'm old enough to remember Vietnam. David, you're old enough to remember Vietnam. We remember Cambodia and Laos and Thailand and everything else that happened. And this is going to be a prolonged conflict. And you will see, I almost guarantee you, American troops on the ground there in a combat role within the next 6 months. I'd like to thank you for letting me come today, and I'd also like to stay here and I'll take your questions as long as you'd like to throw them at me.
If people, they don't be on camera, but if they could come to this mic, it would help. Otherwise, we just pass the mic around.
Okay.
Or speak up loud.
Anybody have any questions?
Can I just point out one thing before you start?
Yes.
Did you mention El Salvador in your staging?
No, I didn't.
You know, just within the past 2 weeks, I think it was.
Yes.
We signed an agreement with the El Salvadorian government to allow U.S. troops and Air Force to be based and staged out of El Salvador.
Yes.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Go ahead. Any questions?
Nobody's got a question?
They never have. They never.
They
I'll take all the documentation.
I'm sorry?
How did you acquire all this documentation?
Well, I publish a newsletter and I have a lot of sources all over the country. A lot of it's available on the web. There are various listservs. But I have a lot of sources in government who are either, I have 6 former case officers for the agency who are subscribers. This document I got off the web, okay? The CIA Inspector General's report. A lot of it is out there if you know where to look. The rest of it I dig for and I obtain from sources or people tip me into court files. Usually I'm able to get to a particular filing in court before a judge seals secret documents as part of the court record, and then I can obtain them legally and publish them. That's how I do it. Yes, ma'am.
What, in your opinion, would it take to reverse or stop this kind of economic deterioration?
A collapse. The system has to get... A snake eating its own tail is not nutritious, okay? We are in an economic system that is very much like a snake eating its own tail, okay? This economic model, see, what we're witnessing in the world, throughout the world now is, well, you've seen it, is enormous transfer of wealth. It's like theft on a hugely organized scale, okay? These people in Colombia don't stand a chance. And we've seen with NAFTA and the maquiladores along the border that large displaced populations, as a result of economic expansion or whatever, are forced to go to the urban centers to work for slave labor, which boosts the profitability in the stock. But that is something that's like a pyramid scheme. It has to run its course. And I think, and I suspect several major economists do, that we're pretty close to that right now, okay? Which might give an opportunity for people to be creative and say, wait a minute, there's other ways to make money. We don't have to do it the way you tell us to. Yes, sir.
I'm still quite unclear about how you compare what's going on in Colombia to Vietnam rather than Kosovo. If we're just gonna, build in Colombia or whatever, then why would it be quicker? Why would it have to be
Thank you. That's a good question. The reason why Colombia is going to be protracted is this: not just the fact that we're there to seek out drug money, but American companies are investing large amounts of capital to operate. George Bush's Secretary of the Treasurer, Nicholas Brady, who was chairman of Dillon Reed, owns a Wall Street investment group called Darby Investments, multi-billion-dollar firm. He's just formed a partnership with the Corfensura Group in Medellin cartel, okay? The specific purpose is for the underwriting of large, massive, heavy construction projects, dams, hydroelectric generating stations, oil rigs, highways, okay? Occidental Petroleum is moving for heavy oil leases in lands controlled by UWA, Indians, and also controlled by the FARC. In other words, all of the corporate moves indicate we're not just going there to make a quick killing, we're going there to stay, okay? And make money for a long term. I mean, there's a swarm forming around Colombia for a lot of different reasons. Darby's group is going because over 20 years, and I should tell you, and I didn't, Colombia is the largest drug producing nation in the world. Not only does it supply almost all of 80% of the cocaine coming into the United States, and we're consuming about 550 metric tons a year, it also produces most of the heroin consumed in this country. Okay, now if you picture, like Le Monde said, 10, 15, 20 billion dollars a year, $100 billion a year accumulating in Colombia over 20 years, you know how much money that is that's down there? Darby and the American corporations are going to suck that money back out and put it on Wall Street, because the one thing Wall Street doesn't want is any country that has anywhere near as much money as we do. Then they're a threat. Yes?
I'm curious what you think would happen if, say, the United States started legalizing drugs. Do you think that that would change things? And if so, how?
I am, in addition to having been a former LAPD narc, I'm also a recovering alcoholic. I've been clean and sober for 18 years come January. I've written 30 articles for the U.S. Journal of Drug and Alcohol Dependence on drug addiction and recovery, and I sponsor men in recovery. And I will tell you that drug addiction is a medical, social, spiritual problem. It is not a criminal problem, okay? And I'm a guy who was down here kicking doors 20 years ago, or 25 years ago, okay? I am a complete advocate for decriminalization. Take the profit out. But it will never happen because the people who are most in favor of decriminalization is Wall Street, or excuse me, of criminalization, is Wall Street and the drug traffickers, because that's what keeps the profit in it. That's my... Medical marijuana, by the way, is the issue that may break down the whole house of cards. Yes.
Mike, getting back
Wayne.
to that other question about a protracted war, can you cover some of the similarities between Colombia and that region of the world and similarities with Laos and Vietnam? And
Yes.
Cambodia?
First of all, FARC guerrillas now are probably, I think, about 200,000, 300. There's a lot of them, and they're extremely well armed. Okay? They're indigenous population. They're well organized, but they're fighting in triple canopy jungle. And anybody who's ever had anything to do with infantry or military knows that in triple canopy jungle, you suddenly render useless a lot of the high-tech skills. It was different in Kuwait because there's no nothing. Okay, it's just desert. So you have complete air power. There's no place to hide. Under triple canopy jungle, air operations are thoroughly hampered. These are people fighting on their native soil at altitude. Helicopters don't work really well above 5,000 to 6,000 feet. So that's leveling the playing field militarily. These people have been fighting a civil war for 30 years. They're on their home turf. They have a much better military superior advantage rather than, let's say, for example, the Iraqi army, which was conscripts, and they were fighting because they were scared of Saddam Hussein, who were not motivated. These people are fiercely motivated. That's number one. The terrain is number two. Number three, if you look at we'll put the map back up. One of the problems for the United States from a military perspective, looking at this map, is the lack of staging areas or abilities to operate close by. For Desert Storm in Panama, it was real easy. Here's Panama. We just parked the aircraft carriers here, and we flew from Texas, and we flew from El Salvador, and we did them. Now, this is the area roughly controlled by the FARC and the ELN guerrillas right here along the Andean Ridge. Runs down through Putumayo here, okay? And they do cross-border because these borders are extremely porous with jungle and the foliage, okay? There's no longer any U.S. military bases in Panama because we gave the Panama Canal back. And I would bet you that if this war gets out of hand, we'll go and occupy Panama. We're already making some moves in that direction. Puerto Rico's up here. That's a long way. You can't do a helicopter assault down here, so you got to have a base in Ecuador. Now you've got two countries involved. Peru, they overthrew Fujimori because he wasn't going to let U.S. planes operate up here. I think that was what ultimately spelled his defeat, or set him up for the coup, which I believe was a CIA move. So the U.S. and its allies will need bases here to attack. Brazil has withdrawn support. So now we're seeing this kind of move, and Venezuela has denied overflight. So if we're going to operate, we have to kind of dig in. That combined with the technology of the FARC rebels, SAM-16 radar-controlled missiles, God knows what else they've got. They've got very high-tech satellite uplinks for... They have, the FARC guerrillas have roadblocks, and they're using laptops now to monitor and tax the cocaine trade and run license numbers and say, you know, so this is not a low-tech war. Okay, it's going to take a while. Yes, sir?
How does Brazil stand on it?
Brazil has withdrawn support for Plan Colombia, as has Bolivia has kind of opposed it. They're kind of irrelevant. Venezuela is totally opposed. Peru is right in the middle of a coup. These countries are basically irrelevant. Some of Central America has withdrawn support. All of Europe has withdrawn support. Even Tony Blair's government in the United Kingdom has withdrawn support for Plan Colombia, because it's also the dollar versus the euro. This is a global issue right now. Yes, you and then you.
I'm having a little trouble believing that the next administration would kind of instigate a war that they know could be long, protracted, that could turn into another Vietnam.
For those of us who lived, I was talking with David before we got here. He got to campus here in '69, and that's when I started at UCLA. You would have had to have been alive in those days to witness the fact that more than half the country was in the street. Well, not more than half the country. But they had regular demonstrations in Washington, D.C. of 500,000, 600,000 people saying, stop the Vietnam War. And it lasted for years. It lasted for 4, 5 more years. Public opinion is irrelevant. We were close to a civil war in 1967-68. Okay? Martin Luther King came out against the Vietnam War, which was what ultimately signed his death sentence. I'm firmly convinced of that. Instead of being a civil rights activist, he became an anti-war activist. And it was a top priority. and you might want to look this up. In the case of, and this is in the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in Washington, D.C., a 1984 decision, Hobson versus Wilson. And it was disclosed that the number one priority of the FBI during the years when the COINTEL program was operative was to prevent an alliance between African Americans and whites. The number one priority of the FBI. We were close to a civil war. It makes no difference. The drive and the demand for profits is what gives us the war, the will of the American. If voting could change anything, it would be illegal. That's my opinion. Yes, sir.
Yeah, do you think that coup in Venezuela is imminent?
They are doing everything they can to weaken Hugo Chavez. Everything they can. He is still thoroughly enjoying the will of the people. The one thing he's got in his pocket is that he's our largest oil supplier. And with the Middle East very unstable right now, we can't afford to take him off too much. He's got a tremendous hand to play. Yes?
What do you think would be the extent of our military involvement? Would it go to drafting as in the Vietnam, or what would it take?
Boy, if we have a draft now over a drug war, this country's falling apart at the seams.
Congress against them.
Yes.
In the classroom here.
What I see is this, and this is exactly the way Vietnam played, and this is another dramatic similarity. With Vietnam, the thing that eventually led to American combat involvement was the first helicopters. We sent in helicopters to Vietnam in '62, I think. Military Assistance Command Vietnam, Military Assistance and Advisory Group Vietnam. And with the helicopters, you had to have American technicians because we won't let some other countries maintain our UH-1, not the UH-60s, the Blackhawks, the real high-tech or the spy planes. So the American technical advisors go in on the ground. Now, one of two things happens. Either the FARC guerrillas attack the ground base and kill some American pilots, at which time the president ascends to the podium and says, "My fellow Americans, I'm deeply upset to inform you today that American troops have died in this horrible land of Colombia, and it is up to us now to back up our boys in uniform." Okay? Or an American helicopter will get shot down with an American aircrew. Immediately then you have to put in fighter support or air superiority, and you have to send in combat troops to protect the bases. It's exactly the way the CIA sucked us into Vietnam. It was created, it was manufactured step by step. Yes?
Curious. I know during Vietnam, they had all the balance of payments problems. It basically forced the world off the Bretton Woods system when Nixon had to suspend, the gold standard. I'm wondering, do you think that that the war in Colombia, if it is protracted and it does take a long time, and America does have to start spending money on all this huge military expenditure, do you think it could spell the end of the the good times we're having now? I mean, do you think that it could?
These guys are great. Yes, absolutely. Understand, all of Europe has withdrawn its support for Plan Colombia, starting with Portugal, Spain, Italy, Great Britain. They have all withdrawn. Right now, the euro is struggling to establish an identity. The euro is a currency partially backed by gold. Okay? The American currency, US dollar, is a fiat currency. It's a free-floating kind of amorphous thing that came off a psychiatrist's couch. Okay? That's the American dollar. There is a battle between the euro and the dollar. Okay, and it's being fought on many different levels. But you're absolutely right. This is an epical struggle right now in Colombia, which is another reason why we can't back out. Okay, Joe.
Last year, I think it was last year, the wife of the Army's head of anti-drug operations.
Lori Hyatt.
Yeah, she was caught using the embassy mail service to send kilos back to New York.
That's right.
So I'm wondering if you've heard anything as far as like an update on what's going on with her case.
She got, I think, a 4-year suspended sentence.
She got a nice slap.
Well, a slap on the wrist. This is the wife of a U.S. Army colonel, the highest-ranking U.S. military anti-drug officer in Colombia, using the embassy diplomatic pouch to send kilos back to New York. She got caught. Her husband, Colonel Hyatt, retired. I don't know what else happened to him. And that's what we do to the people in the structure who are really doing economically what the system is set up to do.
He lost his retirement. I think I read the other day. As a result of court-martial, he lost it.
Okay. Yes?
Can you comment on the Ruppert police scam? What do you think of it?
Yeah. I knew some of the guys involved. I've been out of LAPD for a long time, but I've kept a lot of contacts there. There are currently in this country 60,000 active police corruption cases. 60,000. That's from the Hoover Institute at Stanford. I knew the captain, Nick Salikas at Rampart. Daryl Gates created a mentality in the city of Los Angeles. I remember Daryl Gates saying casual drug users should be shot, even though his son was an addict. He said it in the U.S. Senate hearing. He created a mentality of us versus them, that people who used and or sold drugs on the street were subhuman, were evil, they were the enemies, they were like what we did to the Japanese and were totally dehumanized. They put a drive, and Daryl Gates, in my opinion, has a real problem with his own masculinity. He's always wanted to be a shoot 'em up kind of cop, and he never was. He worked parking and intersection control when he was in uniform, okay? He created that kind of mentality and that kind of fear and that kind of Neanderthalism. At the same time, the hiring standards at LAPD have been systematically destroyed. The screening processes have been destroyed. A lack of oversight. LAPD is the most dysfunctional family in the world, okay? Bernard Parks is a lunatic, okay? And so what happened with Rampart was you had this enormous drive to crush crime, guys wanting to prove their manhood in a system that had totally broken down in terms of discipline, where any kind of inner sense of right and wrong and why people should become policemen to begin with just disappeared. You know, I believe everything that they say happened in Rampart, that they were shooting people for fun and framing people, and it makes me sick to my stomach. Okay, and I think what happened at Rampart's really the tip of the iceberg. I'm going to tell you the truth. It's not the same LAPD I knew. It's not. I think we're done. Thank you very much.